Hi, everybody, and welcome to this great conversation, informal but engaging. And it's really on this theme, can films change society? And what better time to have this conversation, given all the wonderful international movies that there are out there, many of them with Kenyans. I just recently watched The Harder They Fall, for example, with Eddie Gidegi, and there's a whole bunch of things happening out there. But we're really here to honor and give a bit of time to a wonderful Kenyan story, which is the story of Boniface Mwangi, captured in a wonderful documentary called Softie. And with me this session is Njoki Ngumi. No, right. Delete that part. Welcome, and with me this session is Wandia Njoya, who is a lecturer, a scholar, and a social commentator. She's known to many of you. She's passionate about education. She's passionate about social justice and change. But we also have with us Wanja Emily, who's the impact producer for a wonderful little biopic called Thank You for the Rain, as well as Miriam, you're the impact producer for Softie, the documentary that is our major focus over this session. My name is Irungu Houghton, and I'm the executive director of Amnesty International Kenya, but I'm here not really in that capacity. I'm here really as a film enthusiast. And over the next 45 to 1 hour, we're going to spend a bit of time just talking about how important is film in terms of social change from a civic perspective. How important is film in terms of transforming societies? And I'm going to turn to Wandia first to just kick us off with her response to that.
I would say that, and thank you for having me. I would say that film is important in changing the conversation. That's one. Like in this case, people, there had been so much bile against activists, and just showing the other side of what it means to be fighting for social justice, it changes the conversation about what exactly is social justice and what are activists doing for society. And then it also creates empathy and emotion. So we are able to see, for example, Boni as a man who is struggling to juggle his desire for a better society for his children, while his children are caught up and his wife are caught up in the dilemmas of social contradictions. So how do we feel those dilemmas? We feel them through film, through seeing people on the screen, hearing their voices, and just seeing all the colors and hearing all the noises that come with movie making. So I think those are two important things, because if we don't, first, to change, we need to know what we are changing, and that comes from conversation. But the second thing is we need to have empathy for each other as human beings. We need to connect to one another for us to change society. And so film does those two things.
There was a lovely phrase that Wanja, one of our Amnesty members, shared this week, actually, on the back of the Lake International Pan-African Film Festival. And she said that, movies give us the opportunity to live several generations in an hour, something along those lines. And I just love that phrase, because I do find that, my interest in films is really it's a form of escapism. But it's not the escapism that says I don't care. It is the escapism that says I want to reimagine things. I want to see all the complexity of an issue. I want to see the ecosystem of thinking around complex issues. And it's funny. I spend probably 70 hours every week thinking about extrajudicial killings, police brutality, forced evictions, teenage pregnancies, defilement, and all kinds of other social challenges that we have. And then I switch on the television, or I go to the internet and I watch movies, sometimes precisely about those issues. And I've been often asked whether I have a work-life balance. But I think for me, the thing that I look to film to do is really to give me the complexity of an issue, that there is as it's often said, I think Chinamanda said, there's not just one story, there are multiple stories. And it is in those multiple stories that we see the humanity of the issues that we're dealing with. But perhaps even more interestingly, it is where we see the glimmers of hope and the glimmers of light that allow us to unpick these complex problems and actually bring justice to areas where there are human rights violations or a level of indignity. And I just wanted to ask you, Wandia, before we turn to Wanja and Miriam, what did you think of Softie? What were you left with when it came to an end?
Oh, can I just say that as a daughter of an activist, it was painful to watch. It brought back so many memories of being the child, watching your parents go through that kind of thing. So I think that was my main emotion that I'm still grappling with. I think the other thing was relief that finally the story is out there, because for me growing up, we were not talked about well. Our teachers would make a comment, if you do anything, people make a comment about your parents. So I just felt vindicated in a way that Kenya gets to see what it means to be on the other side. And I hope that we will have more of those films. I think there needs to be a story told about, especially the Moi era, how it was for many of us, the children who are watching, and knowing that our parents were doing the right thing, but seeing them receive so much difficulty and ridicule and fear from the society. Like for me, a friend of mine was told that she should not hang around me because you don't know what the government will say. But at the end, I was left with many thoughts and a sense of a luta continua. I think it was even there in the film that we still have, especially the contradiction of Boni going to the streets and talking to people, trying to campaign, and everybody saying, okay, we get what you're saying, but no, that's not how we are going to vote. I think that's a question that is still lingering for me. And I think that needs to be answered by Kenyans. What is it that makes us do that?
I had a similar kind of slightly conflicted set of emotions when it came to an end. So I had it that this will be like Nairobi Half-Life was a decade ago. It will be the depiction of Kenyan democracy, in all its warts and its ugliness. And also, on the other hand, the other emotion was just the bravery, the family sacrifice, the honesty between Njeri and Boniface, and really the movie works on so many different complex levels that one has the opportunity to think about fatherhood and the responsibilities of fatherhood, what it means to be a husband and a partner, and to make career choices that are pit against your family interest in that sense, and have a spouse and a partner who is highly supportive, right? If not worried about the impact of Boniface's choice on the family as a whole, but really understand how important it is for the country for this to happen. So I do think it's going to be one of those masterpiece epics that we've had. I have to be a bit frank and say that I wished there was a happy ending. I do have it in my work that part of what we do is actually to even if as we go into the more darker parts of our society, as storytellers, our responsibility is to leave people present to the power and the tenacity and the audacity of hope and activism and agency, and that's also a responsibility. But it was a documentary, not a fiction movie. Perhaps if he does another one, the fictional side of that could come out. Let me turn first. Let me see, who should I go to first? Let me go to Miriam first. You are the impact producer for Softie now, and obviously it's a clear role. I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit about what is an impact producer. I only learned this about a year and a half ago. I apologize. You reached me through your generation has reached me through several movies, but I only discovered actually the only way I get to see movies is because there are these people called impact producers. So just recreate for us, what's an impact producer, and what were the things that were unexpected for you in producing, or rather in sharing this wonderful this wonderful documentary with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. And you're not alone, Irungu. Impact producing is still a very new field, so many people don't know what impact producing is. Even me, I got into it about two and a half years ago. So, and at that time, I was like, what is this thing? So, but in a nutshell, impact producing is taking social change films and amplifying it, facilitating the means, the space for a film that has a social element, and taking it to the key audiences, and providing tools for dialogue and providing a space for reflection and conversation. So as you guys were talking about the power of film, and Wandia was saying, like, it provokes conversation, it allows people to kind of look deeper into issues in a more nuanced way. We as impact producers, we kind of try to facilitate it and make sure that the people who are reflected in the film, or the people who are the most impacted by the film, get to see the film. So it's been a really interesting journey, a very exciting journey with Softie. The film came out last year, premiered early on in the year in 2020 at Sundance before COVID. Things were very exciting. We were very excited to bring it back home. We had even a small screening with various actors who gave us a lot of feedback and, just excitement for what this film could do. And then, COVID came and we were like, oh, what do we do now? Because the main way to get this film out to people is either in theaters or in screenings or, physical, This idea of doing it online was still quite, fresh. So it took us a while to figure out how to get the film back home. But finally in October, when things opened up a bit, we were able to premiere in Nairobi, in theaters, and to a very, the reaction was something we couldn't even explain. We were so excited by how many people loved the film. We were excited by people really focusing on the family element, the empathy of seeing a family story, because there is a larger historical political narrative in the film, obviously. But we were hoping that people would be able to see both sides and not have a divisive conversation about that, but see what the larger context does to an intimate story of a family. And I think that's something that has really been picked up by people. That's the main reaction we get. Either, wow, it's so, it was so interesting to see the backstory of Boniface and his family, to see what meets more than the eye, and it's just been a very great journey. This year, we've been really trying to focus on how to get the film throughout the country, because we have a lot of people who've seen it here in Nairobi and those who've been able to see it online, but we're really trying to see how we can get it, everywhere. So through community screenings, we've started a community screening push, also trying to see how we can get it on broadcast. But the journey has been great, and it's really encouraged me as an impact producer to continue to find these stories that I feel, can make change. So in the question of, can films impact society and make change? I believe so, because that's the core of my work. So if it's not, then I'm not doing anything in my work.
And let me ask you, Miriam, because I'm sure people listening to us would be very curious about how many people have watched Softie, both in Kenya and internationally to date. Do you have a sense of what's the number of people?
Wow, that one is hard because we haven't put all the numbers together.
I'm not going to ask you to name them or to give us their ethnicity, but just generally, do you have a sense? Is it tens of thousands or 100,000, or should I say millions?
I think definitely tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. Yeah, tens of thousands. Yeah, globally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is great. I mean, I think there are a number of thoughts really. One is Kenyans have made many movies, and of course we have Riverwood as an industry, and there is there's a whole, I guess, generation or several generations of movies that we can really be proud of as Kenyans. And many of them do have, strong social justice themes. I'm thinking, if I think about the Nest and the work that they have done really to give representation to communities that are considered to be minorities and are silent in everyday life. I mean, the LGBTIQ community or communities, and movies like Rafiki and more recently I Am Samuel. These movies are considered to be somewhat of I can just quote the censorship boards and so on. They almost like an abomination. But the reality is that Kenyans are interested in these kind of stories as well. I was very shocked to learn from Prestige Plaza that more people watched Rafiki that one week that the court opened up the space for Kenyans to watch Rafiki than watched Black Panther. Right? We all talk about Black Panther, but nobody knows this story about how many people came out to watch Rafiki. And then with the light touch, I can just mention that as far as I know, people didn't go in with one sexual identity and come out with another. So for people who are listening to us who are really horrified by that piece of data that I've just given, they shouldn't be. In fact, many things, it's just hysteria. Back to
what you've said,
Miriam.
Irungu, is important in terms of the idea that Kenyans want to see these stories as well. Because with Softie, when we did our theatrical run, we were only given a week or two. Like, I don't know if the theaters were so, they thought that people would actually come, but we ended up having an 8-week run because every week it was just people wanted to see it, And I think that was very powerful as well to show that Kenyans want to see Kenyan stories. And we also, I think we were the #1 film in those 8 weeks, and I know Tenant was also there, and I know Tenant's a very big film, So the fact that we were able to be #1, a Kenyan film being #1 all those 8 weeks was very powerful as well.
I mean, surely people have got this wrong, right? So if in one of the Star Wars movies, somebody walks across the screen speaking in one of our Kenyan languages, and that's the best part of the movie for most Kenyans watching this particular Star Wars movie, why would they not want to see a full-length movie about Kenyans? It doesn't make sense, right? Let me turn to Wanja, Emily, to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. I mean, recreate for us what is the movie, the film "Thank You for the Rain" about, and what experience have you had trying to promote this environmentally conscious film for the country?
Yeah, thank you so much, Irungu and Wandia. For Miriam and I, this is like a dream sort of convening, because all the work that we do, we are constantly working with the civil society, we are constantly working with activists. And this is based on a very simple principle as well of impact producing, which is what we have is a tool, right? And we are filmmakers. And so for us to drive this social change, we have to constantly and always partner with people who are already doing that work. So we always say we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to partner with the people who are doing that work and offer the tool that is film, because storytelling, as we know, is a powerful tool to drive change, to create empathy, and hence to drive a call for action. So it's really such a pleasure just to be in this panel, to have this discussion with you, with a lot of respect, really. So I just want to touch on something Wandia said, and also Miriam touched on, about the importance of film and importance of storytelling in driving social impacts. And where we say, for us, obviously, because of what we believe it starts with a good story. And if I don't have a good story, then really there's nothing much I can do. That story is everything. And so then I'm going to go ahead and use this story as a tool to create awareness from all the screenings that I'm going to do. And it's just good to say that what we do is not necessarily like the main distribution. We're not distributors. What we will do when we are screening is what we call impact screenings, meaning it's very strategic. We want to know who's in the room. We want to know who we're bringing together, because we have a goal for that screening. We're always asking ourselves, what do I get? What are we going to get from this screening? And then we want this awareness to lead to some kind of engagement. So what activities are we going to create around that screening so there's some kind of engagement that contributes towards building a stronger movement where you already work in, Irungu and Wandia. And then that hopefully leads to social change. So pretty much in a nutshell, this is how we look at the progression of an impact campaign when we get to run one. And so then we are using this to change behavior, to change hearts and minds, hopefully to build communities and also to change structures. And so depending on the film or the story or the impact campaign, these ones will take different shapes and forms. So to come back to your question, Irungu, I've been running the impact campaign for a film called Thank You for the Rain. And this is the story of a small scale farmer called Kisilu from Kitui in Kenya. And in the course of 5 years, the filmmaker Julia Dar follows him. And you basically see his life transform from a father and a farmer struggling with the effects of climate change to a community leader and to an international, climate activist. And why? Why does it need to take this long? Why do it this way? Because when you think about climate change, there's several things about that topic in itself. Number one, I know we've been told that it's a Muzungu agenda. Number two, there's also some issue fatigue around the term and the issue of climate change. Number three, it's really not viewed as being sexy enough, especially by the urban, audiences, so to speak, and by the younger people. So what does a film do then to something like this, to a topic like this and a story like this? Through that, then you see what that actually means on a very personal level. In that, when climate changes, when it doesn't rain, for my grandmother and our communities at the forefront of climate, it means they will not have enough harvest. Now that has a lot of implications. It means that that's going to affect their diet, their nutrition. It means they won't have surplus to sell to get money to take their kids to school. It means that they're then vulnerable to health issues, all pointing down to money, and it means that they don't have a decent life, pretty much. So when you break down this word climate change, and then you see it through human experience and see what that looks like to our people, then you hopefully understand the issue better, and maybe you develop empathy. And basically what we've done is take that film. It's a co-production between Kenya, UK, and Norway. And so we've taken this film with total honor and respect of knowing that we have a very powerful tool in our hands to run an impact campaign that we had activities on the grassroots level where we worked with Kisilu's community to fundraise and build an earth dam with irrigation farms around it, and to develop just awareness and information within the community members, and pretty much figuring out what is adaptation. And I know this has been the COP week, so you probably have heard a lot of these words flying around. But what is adaptation really? Like, how can we cushion our communities when the droughts run longer? What do? They need to migrate, or do they need to think of other sources of income, things like that? So this is some of the work we have done. But then when we were doing that, we realized that doesn't happen alone. It ties into what's happening on the national level, right? In terms of policy, in terms of what the NGOs are doing, in terms of the civil society. And so we realized we needed to do some work on that level as well. So we partnered with several organizations, so many of them, frankly, we never do this work alone, to do something called Climate Story Lab, which brought together all these groups of people to say, how can we reimagine some of these conversations and solutions and climate communication, for example, to drive social change by centering it on storytelling and working with storytellers? Because we're on the same side, right? So then how do we expand how this, right?
A little bit, Emily, if it's okay, Wanja.
Yeah.
If I can just come into that, because actually I think if I was being a little bit aggressive and speaking on behalf of some of the critics that are not so, I guess, not so in tune with the concerns around climate chaos. They're not so concerned about issues of electoral democracy. They're not interested in sexual minorities. They definitely don't care about police brutality. If we've answered the question, do films change society? There's an obvious question, which is, should film change society? I mean, is it the soft version of Cambridge Analytica. I mean, if we take it that movies are about telling stories, maybe they're about expressing or generating emotion in the viewers, then perhaps the question I think I can ask all three of you, and I'll start with Wandia. Let me ask the question, is this just manipulative? I mean, are we essentially using art to manipulate people? And what's the difference between that and propaganda? Let's go to Wandia first, then come back to Miriam, and then Wanja.
All right, I hope I am not spoiling things when I say I don't expect film to change society. I expect it to change the conversation. And for me, especially in Kenya, our biggest challenge is sustaining the conversation, because we are dealing with a story, and you in fact mentioned it, that people don't care. Both you and Wanja have mentioned it, that it's very difficult to get people to care about climate, about sexual minorities, about police brutality. They see it because we are surrounded with an ecosystem that compartmentalizes ideas and experiences. And so I think the role of film right now, and maybe it will change, is to refuse that disconnection, to bring the stories together, to make people empathize with their hearts, but also to see this is not a story about a nobody. It's about my grandmother. It's about my neighbor. It's about my classmate. We need to be able to connect to the stories that are being told at a very intimate level. And for me, that is what will change. So if we are talking about changing society, I'm not looking at the big structures. Are we going to have a new government? Are we going to have a new institution? I'm looking at, can we change society so that we start to care? So that we start to care for people, especially the people who may not be as powerful as we are or as privileged as we are. And can we care about the earth in which we live? Because it makes no sense for us to be destroying our home and us not seeing that it's an urgent matter. So right now, for me, the agenda for film should be that, to get people to talk about the issues and not disconnect them from each other, and to get people to care. I think those, especially in Kenya, those are our two biggest challenges. And I think nobody can do care work like artists, because artists appeal to the emotion, and they appeal to color and beauty and aesthetics. And that's the best way to get people to care. So for me, if we are changing society, I want a caring Kenya. I want a good Kenya where we give a damn. Sorry to use the word. Yeah.
No, dams are very good. Actually, we just don't build enough of them without people stealing the money. In terms of that, but let me come back to you a little bit. I mean, Wandia, you and I have all watched movies that politically align to our own opinions, but if we're honest, they're essentially just propaganda and broadcasts for a particular line. How do we avoid this I guess binarizing and simplifying of what are complex human issues, even as we keep an uplifting, caring, empathetic, and connected experience for viewers? Let me go to Miriam first. And feel free to speak from either Softie or any other movie that you've watched or love.
Oh, okay, that's a good question, Irungu.
Tough ones we do here, just the tough ones.
Yeah. Can you repeat the main question? Just repeat it for me one more time.
Yeah, no, the question is this, like you and I and Wandia, and I'm sure, Wanja is in the same space on this one, is that we've watched movies that align with our values, right? We, intrinsically characters, the protagonists, we love the storylines. It leaves us feeling reaffirmed in our world views and our beliefs. But we know deep down that this was really just a long advertisement for a political issue. How do we keep the complexity of the issue while we retain the power of a particular narrative that uplifts, that shines the light on the marginalized, that projects values that are really progressive? How do we keep that balance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think just adding on
or
to
should we
what.
sorry, let me just ask, Miriam, that was a leading question. I apologize. Should we keep that balance? Is it okay to make propaganda movies?
Mm-hmm. No, I think adding to what Wandia was saying about film changing the conversation or adding to the conversation, I feel that what film allows these conversations to be is, for me, the intimacy of film, especially documentary film, and the creativity around it gives for this kind of balance, Like I don't see, yes, film is subjective, whoever's making the film, they're seeing it through their own, lens. How the film is edited is through specific lenses. But I feel it's art. That's what art is. The art comes from the creator, and it's as us, as the audience, to see and take and kind of unpack what we believe is important, what we believe isn't important. So I feel that this balance is there in film because it's a story, it's a long form, you get a bunch of different data points, you get a bunch of information, and you as the audience member have the agency to decide on, what you take in and what you don't take in. The hope is that the conversation, there are different, in impact producing, a tool that we use a lot is a discussion guide, a screening kit. So we do kind of prompt different themes, and again, it's gonna come from a specific goal, right? But I feel that the beauty of film in the sense of the intimacy of storytelling allows for that balance to be, as opposed to, and I think that's why Softie itself also was quite successful in that way, because it wasn't just a story about Boniface and his activism and all those different events, bringing Njeri into the story, bringing the kids into the story, seeing everyday, life that they were living that's, you can relate to. I think that put a nice juxtapose to these larger issues that can often get divisive and be seen as propaganda and things like that. So I think that's my take.
That's great, thank you. That's thoughtful. Let's move on to Wanja in terms of your views on this.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I totally want to agree, what Miriam said. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? You have people, whoever they are, they understand the power of the media, they understand the power of storytelling. And so anyone, really, it's free, they're out there, anyone can use it to drive their agenda. And so we, as storytellers, take a stand, and this is where the impact producer comes in, where we say we are deliberate, we have a strategy, and what we want to do is use this particular medium and this particular piece of storytelling to drive a certain agenda. And this is true of somebody who decides to take it up for counter narrative. We have seen it being done all the time, isn't it? And so it speaks to something, what you quoted earlier, Irungu, about about Chimamanda and, the danger of a single story. And this is it. Then what are the different perspectives we are going to present, and which ones must we be really aggressive to make sure that they are seen as much as possible, and where we driving a call to action, and what kind of change do we want to see? Because it's true, film does change culture, and culture will affect how we vote. Culture will affect how we see ourselves and the things we believe in. But, just very quickly to answer that, there's something that when we are doing this impact work, we really factor. And one of the things is there's something we so lovingly called the story environment. And we are always asking ourselves, this film that I have, where is it landing to the audience? For example, is it a familiar issue that's probably going to this film comes to spotlight that particular issue? meaning the audience kind of know about it. So what does the film come to do about that particular issue? You know, is it an issue that's already really entrenched? And so it's almost hard to change that. And you gave very good examples earlier, for example, screening of Rafiki and even Softie. Does this film help contextualize that and humanize that so that we see that in a different perspective? Sometimes also we're asking ourselves, is this film going to bring something new? Is it investigative? Is it landing in an environment where this issue is hidden and so it brings out a certain truth? I remember when we were screening, and because Irungu, Amnesty supported the screening of the Wagala massacre film, you know, and that's a good example of revealing an issue that's just not been known, and we need the truth to be known and people to decide what they're gonna do with that information. And then sometimes we're asking ourselves, is it a fresh reveal? Are we showing something so new? Because according to the audience, this is where the issue lies. And so in thinking about these different dynamics, then we are definitely taking a stand and saying this is the direction we're going. But as to what the audience then decide to do with that information is entirely their choice.
I think that's a great way to leave that question. That, you know, I think what I hear is storytelling is never neutral, but neither is the listener. It can influence perspective, but actually where it goes after the movie or after the film is really the preserve of the agency of the people who watch it, and I think that's a clear one. Actually, you brought me back to you know, the two moments. I can't even remember which exact year it was, but definitely 6 or 7 years ago when we worked on the Wagala massacre, Scarred, the documentary. And I just wanted to share one thing that is still very, you know, is still very kind of touching for me. And there were two moments. There was the Eastleigh showing, and there was the showing in Wandia. And the one in Wanja was particularly, I guess, poignant in many ways, because in the audience were many of the people who were survivors of that massacre. And they, for the first time, got to see the story told visually. And in particular, one of the people that, you know, died fairly soon after that was their leader and champion, Chief Bishar, who really had devoted his life, you know, first of all, sacrificed, you know, comforts to essentially, and a government job to essentially do what he thought the government should be doing at that moment, which was to protect the community from the government, which is an interesting take on being a government officer. And then secondly, spent the rest of his life until the moment he died really championing for the Wajir Massacre Trust. So I think this is a great example, that documentary you brought up is a great example of how an issue that was, you know, many years ago, 30 or so years ago, continues to live on through the immortalizing in a documentary like Scarred. And there are many others. I wanted to come to another area really, which is just looking at, you know, how could we encourage more stories to be told? I mean, how could we encourage more of these human interest, social justice stories to be told in all their, you know, in all their complexity? And, you know, as Wandia started, you know, I wondered whether the Right Reverend would accept to have a story, a film made about him, you know. You know, I would definitely watch a movie about Timothy Njoya's courage in the 1990s, or even a movie or a film about the Nyayo House dungeons and what happened to each of the survivors and those who didn't make it, what happened to their families. So I think the question that we could ask is, you know, how could we encourage more films to emerge that would change society? Wandia, any thoughts on this as we move into the almost
I think one thing that filmmakers and other Kenyan artists must not listen to is this idea that something doesn't work if nothing happens after that. And we've been told that so much. We've been told unless you can have a project that brings income to people, unless there's a building you can put up, then there's nothing you have done. I think we need to remember that stories are the life of society. We have to keep telling them. It doesn't matter whether we get 10 clicks or 1,000 clicks, although of course we would like a lot of people to watch. But I think the fundamental thing is that once you tell a story, you're doing something for society, and you should not measure it by money and by, sorry, I know we are talking to impact people, but I think impact needs to be changed. Our idea of impact should not be about money and buildings and projects. It should be about people. And as long as we are telling stories, we do have an impact. For me, where I come from, which is the education sector, I would like to see more of these artistic projects, including films, being easily accessible to teachers. So that if a teacher wants to teach something, they can go to an archive and say, okay, why don't we use this film to teach this class today? And it can be anything ranging from, environmental studies to history to, to chemistry even. For me, that is something that I am concerned about. I feel that there's not enough connection between the educators, let me not say education. There's not enough conversation between educators and artists. And that is something that I wish to see change. I wish to see us having more access to the artwork that is being done by Kenyans, so that we can use some of these artworks in class. And just to finish off by saying, there is an interest for filmmakers in this happening, because we are raising your next audience. We are raising the audience who see the value of paying 200 shillings to come and watch a film instead of going to the bar. So there needs to be more connection, a more authentic connection between educators and artists, so that we can raise the next generation of Kenyans who appreciate the arts and are willing to pay for it. So those are the two things I would say.
I think that's great. A great way of setting up the conversation for Wanja and also for Miriam. Your world is very much, kind of impact, reach, commercialization, returns, both in terms of numbers of people watching and the amount of money that the particular films will make. But I think you also talk in terms of the kind of social impact that it has. So I don't want to make it too crude, but how do you manage that tension? Between over commercialization on one hand, or only a standard of success that is about how many shillings did you bring in for the producer, the director, and the artists, versus what impact did it have on society? And any thoughts about this idea of linking places of learning, educators with creatives? Any thoughts on that, on those two areas? Should we go Miriam first, then Wanja?
Yeah, the question of really what is impact and how do you quantify, or how can you, I completely agree with Wandia, and it's a question that's very difficult to answer, especially in terms of, I believe impact is a long-term game, and films are a contribution to larger movements, to larger conversations. So when someone asks you, a film's been out 6 months, and then they're like, so what's the impact that you've had? It's like, what are you meant to give them? Numbers. Oh, this is how many people have watched. There's surveys, 50% of people have said that this film has done this, and those are beautiful things to show, but really, it's a long-term game, and you really won't know what the impact of a film will have for years to come. We hope and pray that Softie continues to be watched, years to come, and is part of larger conversations around activism, around politics in Kenya, etc. But that's something that we're giving a launch to. But we just hope that it can continue to take a life of its own. And what Wandia was talking about in terms of educational outreach. That's a big part of the impact producing industry. And it's something that I think even Wanja, we were having this conversation of how hard it is to get films into schools. It's a big target audience that we have, but there's not as much structure or, let's say, maybe communication. I don't know where the gap is, but it's very difficult to do so. Whereas in a lot of other countries, like say in the US, they have these whole, organizations dedicated to these educational distribution, universities and teachers can just go and, get these films and show. So it's kind of, we have to be innovative and start thinking about how we can build that for ourselves. And yeah, because I think educational institutions are the key, for these kind of films, and to have these discussions. So it's definitely something that I'm hoping we can continue having conversation around. And I, as an impact producer, I'm very open to, thinking of ideas of how to do that. Yeah.
That's great, Miriam. I think, you come from an industry, historically and this, I guess, will come to Wanja as well, where they often argue that, the first thing is like, what's the rate of return on this investment, right? Am I getting my money back? And it's not like this devilish capitalist concern. It's really this thing of like, if I don't make money, I can't make another movie, right? Or I have to go to somebody else who may not have my values to be able to make the next movie, and I will then have to compromise with editorial lines and so on. So there is some kind of there's a reality that's there. But the other thing that struck me just recently, I was being told that for most of the Hollywood movies, they make their 50% of what they make on a movie. That return comes in within the first 1 month, if not the first couple of weekends. And that's the other consideration that unfortunately. The standard has been set by Hollywood and various other places. But let me come to Wanja. What's your thoughts on this? Like, how can we balance these different interests, long-term, short-term, the shilling, and influence and learning?
Yeah, I would say that it's not a one-actor affair. It's definitely going to take collaboration between different people and different sectors and different players on the value chain. And, I like the example that you gave of Hollywood. And I think a lot of us, have been asking ourselves, and we have seen it happen in other regions, for example, in the Nigerian market, where you're asking what works for us. Does the Hollywood model really work for us in a space where you don't really have the box office culture, you don't even have enough theaters and exhibition spaces, but we need our content to get to our people? How do we do that? We say that our people don't like to pay, but if you actually make it accessible, people will give their time and they will pay and turn up and watch. And so the content creation is ahead of the infrastructure, of the distribution infrastructure. Filmmakers and storytellers want to continue doing that. They don't want to be bogged down on building a structure and things like that. And so we do need the collaboration of business people and people who can see the film industry as viable as it is. So that's why I'm saying it's a different actor sort of affair, and collaboration is required. But also, one of the other things to answer your question on how do we get these films to be seen more and more, how does it become a culture like you have in the Western markets and everything? We have to normalize, number one, working with storytellers. We have to normalize working with filmmakers. And on top of that, we have to normalize paying for it. Filmmaking, storytelling costs. It's a skill. People go to school for these things. Actually, people spend hours and hours trying to follow characters, trying to find these stories, and also trying to find funding. And so what we are saying is that these are not separated when you think about it. We just need to start rethinking how we see these two different industries and sectors and realize that they're very powerful when we work together and incorporate storytelling in the things that we do. But then also understand, learn how to work with storytellers, in that it's not like a commercial, it's not like a, like a corporate documentary. It's let the storyteller, give them the freedom to create, because that's what they do, right? And then there is the question of driving social change, which sometimes tend to be, you can do both, right? like for Miriam and myself, the films that we've worked on have had distributors whose job has been to drive the profit margin, like to bring revenue. And so they are concerned about the box office. They're concerned about where it's going to be seen. They're concerned about the VOD acquisitions and how many countries, territories, and all of these things. While we are concerned about that, our main goal is how can we actually drive impact, social impact with this film? What can change possibly? And so, of course, in that case, we want to know where is it going to be seen? What kind of impact distribution are we talking about? But we see both processes complementing one another. And every now and then you can do both, right? So to answer your question is that it's not short term. It's something we have to think about long term. It's something we have to think about daily. And we, like you say, Wandia said earlier, we have to make these films, this work accessible easily to literally anybody, be it schools and everyone else. And we have to really reimagine what our collaborations could look like so we can drive this faster.
That's great. That's actually a wonderful place to bring us to a close as we've come to the end of our time. And I just wanted to maybe just recap, a couple of thoughts that came through for me really was, that filmmaking is never neutral, nor is the listener. So if they will criticize, if the listener says that is propaganda, I think the listener needs to think a little bit about what opinions do they hold that leave them with the occurring that what they're watching is propaganda. It may be just simply that it doesn't reflect their values and their opinions. I think we've also said that, filmmaking may not change society, but it does create openings for citizens to act on issues that are important to them. And that's the real power of film and filmmaking like Softie. I think we've also said that, filmmaking is a space not just for creating values and a mirror for society, but it is also an industry with the financial requirements of an industry. I think I'm left, first of all, much more appreciative of the movie. Please go to softiethefilm.com where you will find more information about the film. And I'm also left with a deep appreciation for the work of impact producers like Wanja and Miriam. Thank you very much for what you do. For the rest of us, Wandia and me, who are film enthusiasts, social justice activists, we can do no better than to just thank you for being with us this session, and also to invite you to follow the Nairobi Film Fest and to thank them for the work that they do to highlight African, Kenyan, and international movies for us all. And if you're not familiar with the Nairobi Film Fest, just start following at NBO Film Fest, and keep in touch, and hopefully keep connected to this wonderful facility that we have. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.